In a dusty Nebraska auction yard, a desperate single mother clutching her last $500 was about to make a bid that would destroy a corporate empire. What started as buying cheap renewable energy took a shocking turn when she discovered $210 million in buried secrets. Maya Rodriguez wasn't your typical bidder. For 7 years, she had taught environmental science, known for making complex energy concepts accessible to students. When she bought a decommissioned wind turbine for $550, she had no idea she was walking into the biggest corporate conspiracy of the decade. Maya's desperate gamble would expose crimes that executives would kill to keep hidden. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Rodriguez clutched the 5 crumpled $100 bills in her jacket pocket, her fingers tracing the worn edges of what remained of her life savings. The Nebraska wind cut through the government auction yard with merciless efficiency, carrying the scent of diesel exhaust and desperation. Around her, men in oil-stained coveralls and women with calculating eyes examined the scattered remnants of bureaucratic excess, decommissioned vehicles, surplus office furniture, and the mechanical corpses of infrastructure projects that had outlived their usefulness. She stood apart from the crowd, her once confident posture now shaped by months of carrying invisible weight. At 34, Maya still possessed the sharp intelligence that had made her one of Lincoln High's most respected environmental science teachers. But exhaustion had carved new lines around her eyes. Her dark hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, showed premature streaks of gray that hadn't been there 2 years ago when her world began its slow collapse. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the portable speaker system, rattling off lot numbers with the mechanical precision of someone who had sold hope and desperation in equal measure for decades. Maya barely heard him, her attention fixed on lot 247, a wind turbine, 40 feet of white fiberglass and steel that promised salvation or at least the possibility of keeping the lights on for another month. Decommissioned Vestas V27, rated at 225 kilowatts. The auctioneer called out, his voice cutting through her reverie. Originally installed in 1998, removed from service due to grid modernization. Sold as is, where is? Do I hear $50? Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She had researched this moment for weeks, studying wind patterns across their small acreage, calculating energy outputs, convincing herself that this desperate gamble could work. The turbine towered above the other auction items like a monument to renewable ambition, its 3 blades motionless in the autumn air. The memory hit her without warning. Standing in her classroom 3 years ago, pointing to a similar turbine on the interactive whiteboard while explaining to her sophomores how kinetic energy transformed into electrical power. She had believed then that knowledge could change the world, that teaching kids about sustainable energy would somehow help build a better future. The irony wasn't lost on her now. Standing in an auction yard about to bet their survival on technology she had once taught others to revere. I hear 50 from the gentleman in the blue cap, the auctioneer continued. Do I hear 75? A scrap metal dealer raised his hand. Maya recognized him from previous auctions, a weathered man who saw only the value in steel and copper, who would strip the turbine for parts and sell them to the highest bidder. The thought made her sick. This machine had generated clean energy for over 2 decades. It deserved better than becoming raw material for someone else's profit. 100, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. Heads turned in her direction. A few auction regulars exchanged knowing glances. Another desperate homeowner trying to solve their problems with surplus government equipment. Maya ignored their stares and focused on the auctioneer, who nodded in her direction. The bidding continued in fits and starts. 200, 250, 300. Each increase felt like a physical blow, eating away at money she couldn't afford to lose. Maya thought about Lily waiting at home, probably curled up with one of her library books about renewable energy and space exploration, unaware that their electricity might be shut off next week if this gamble failed. The parallels weren't lost on her. Just as this turbine had been deemed obsolete by the energy company that once relied on it, Maya herself had been discarded when the school district faced budget cuts. 27 years old with a master's degree in environmental science, and she had been reduced to cleaning office buildings at night and selling produce at weekend farmers markets. The American dream, she had learned, came with no guarantees and precious few safety nets. "For $100, called out the scrap dealer. Maya's throat constricted. She had exactly $500 to her name. Money scraped together from her cleaning job, her market earnings, and the small stack of bottles and cans she had been collecting for months. Lily thought it was a recycling project for the environment. Maya had never corrected her. "$4.50, Maya said, her voice barely carrying over the wind. The scrap dealer shook his head and walked away, apparently deciding the margin wasn't worth the effort. Maya felt a surge of vindication mixed with terror. She was committed now, win or lose. "Do I hear 500? The auctioneer asked, scanning the crowd with practiced efficiency. Silence stretched across the auction yard. Maya realized she was holding her breath. Going once at $4.50. Going twice. "500, came a voice from behind her. Maya spun around to see a man in an expensive jacket, someone who clearly didn't belong among the usual auction crowd. Her stomach plummeted. She had no room to bid higher. "$5.50, she heard herself say, though she had no idea where the extra $50 would come from. Maybe she could return the groceries she had bought yesterday. Maybe she could skip the asthma medication Lily needed next week. The well-dressed man studied her for a long moment, taking in her worn jacket and desperate expression. Something in his face softened. He shook his head almost imperceptibly and walked away. Going once at $5.50. Going twice. Sold to the lady in the brown jacket for $550. Maya stood frozen as applause rippled through the small crowd. The auctioneer's assistant was already moving toward her with a clipboard, but her mind reeled with the implications of what she had just done. She had exceeded her budget by $50 she didn't have, betting their future on a 25-year-old machine that might not even work. But as she looked up at the turbine's graceful blades, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. This machine represented possibility. It was technology she understood, science she had taught, engineering she respected. If she could make it work, it might generate enough electricity to keep them in their house for another few months, maybe even longer. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she signed the paperwork. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Tom Chin. "Maya." His voice carried the familiar edge of barely controlled anger. "I know you're hiding money from me." "I'm not hiding anything, Tom." She kept her voice low, aware of the auction-goers around her. "And we've been divorced for 2 years. My finances aren't your concern anymore. When it comes to Lily's support, everything is my concern. I know you bought something expensive today. Jerry Morrison saw you at the government auction. So where's my cut?" Maya closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of dealing with her ex-husband's demands. Tom had a network of drinking buddies scattered across 3 counties, and somehow he always knew when she made any kind of purchase. The man who had contributed exactly $0 to their daughter's care, since the divorce still felt entitled to monitor every penny Maya earned. "There is no cut, Tom, and there's no extra money. This is about keeping the lights on for your daughter. Our daughter. And if you've got money for whatever the hell you bought at that auction, you've got money to help me out. I'm in a tight spot here, Maya. Some people aren't as patient as I am about collecting debts." The threat was subtle but clear. Tom had been gambling again, borrowing money from people who didn't rely on the court system to collect payments. Maya had seen the bruises on his face the last time he picked up Lily for his court-mandated visitation. "I can't help you, Tom. I spent every dollar I had, and it wasn't enough. I had to promise to pay an extra $50 by next week just to get what I bought. Then sell it. Whatever it is, sell it and give me half. That's fair. It's a wind turbine, Tom. I bought it to generate electricity for the house. For Lily's sake." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. When Tom spoke again, his voice carried a different quality. Calculation mixed with desperate hope. "A wind turbine? Like one of those big ones? How much is something like that worth?" "It's only worth something if I can make it work. And right now, I need to focus on that instead of your problems." My problems become your problems real fast, Maya. You know that. I'll call you tomorrow, and you better have a solution figured out. The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone for a moment before sliding it back into her pocket. Around her, the auction continued with mechanical efficiency, but her attention had shifted to the immediate future. She needed to figure out how to transport a wind turbine to their property, how to install it safely, and most importantly, how to make it generate the electricity that might save their home. As she walked back to her 15-year-old pickup truck, Maya caught sight of her reflection in the side mirror of a parked car. For just a moment, she saw herself as she used to be, confident, purposeful, ready to tackle any challenge with scientific method and determined effort. The woman looking back at her had been beaten down by circumstances but not broken. Not yet. She pulled out her phone and dialed home. Lily answered on the second ring, her voice bright with 8-year-old enthusiasm. Mom, did you get it? Did you get the wind turbine? Maya smiled despite everything. I got it, sweetheart. We're going to have our own renewable energy system just like we talked about. This is so cool. Wait until I tell everyone at school. We're going to be like, completely sustainable. Can we calculate the kilowatt hours it will produce? Can we measure the wind speed? Can we... Slow down, Lily. We'll do all of that. But first, we need to figure out how to get it home and set it up properly. This is going to be a real engineering challenge. I love engineering challenges. When will it be delivered? Maya looked back at the towering turbine, its blades catching the afternoon light. Soon, baby. Very soon. And once we get it working, we might not have to worry about the electric bills anymore. What she didn't tell her daughter was that they had exactly 3 days before the foreclosure notice became final, before the bank took their house regardless of any future electricity savings. The wind turbine wasn't just about reducing their utility bills. It was about buying time, creating hope, and maybe finding a way forward that didn't involve choosing between Lily's asthma medication and keeping the heat on. As Maya drove home through the Nebraska countryside, passing fields of corn stubble and farmhouses that had seen better days, she allowed herself to imagine success. The turbine spinning in the wind, generating clean energy, reducing their bills enough to stay afloat. Lily growing up in a home powered by renewable technology, may be inspired to become the kind of engineer who could solve the world's energy problems. It was a beautiful dream. Maya clung to it as tightly as she had clutched those $500, knowing that sometimes hope was the only currency that mattered, even when you couldn't afford it. The foreclosure notice fluttered against Maya's front door as the Nebraska wind picked up, a cruel reminder that she had exactly 3 days to produce a miracle. She stood in her driveway at 6 in the morning, staring at the wind turbine that had cost her everything she owned and $50 she didn't have. The massive components lay scattered across her gravel drive like the pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she could solve. Lily emerged from the house in her pajamas, carrying 2 cups of coffee, one real for Maya, one pretend for herself with mostly milk and a splash of the cheap instant coffee they bought at the discount store. At 8 years old, she had adapted to their circumstances with the resilience that broke Maya's heart and filled her with pride in equal measure. Morning, Mama. Is today the day we become energy independent? Lily's voice carried the enthusiasm of someone who still believed problems could be solved with enough determination and the right application of scientific principles. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the chipped ceramic mug. Today we find out if your mama made the smartest or stupidest decision of her life. It was smart, Lily said with the absolute certainty of childhood. We learned about renewable energy in school. Mrs. Patterson said wind turbines can generate electricity for decades, once they're properly installed. Maya smiled despite her exhaustion. Even in her current circumstances, her daughter's faith in science and technology reminded her of why she had loved teaching. There was something pure about explaining how the world worked to minds that still believed anything was possible. The delivery truck arrived precisely at 7, driven by a man who introduced himself as Dale Morrison, Jerry Morrison's brother, apparently. Maya recognized the name from Tom's phone call yesterday. Her ex-husband's network of drinking buddies and casual acquaintances spread across 3 counties, ensuring that every financial decision she made eventually reached his ears. Jerry told me you bought yourself a windmill, Dale said, examining the components with professional interest. Haven't seen one of these old Vestas models in years. They're solid machines built when companies still made things to last. Maya felt a flicker of hope. You've worked with wind turbines before? 20 years ago, when the first wave of wind farms went up across Kansas. Lost that job when the bigger companies moved in with their automated systems and foreign labor. Dale's voice carried the familiar bitterness of rural workers who had been promised that renewable energy would bring prosperity to farming communities, only to watch the profits flow to distant corporate headquarters. Can you help me install it? Dale looked at the components, then at Maya's modest house and the determined expression on her face. Lady, installing a wind turbine isn't a weekend project. You need a concrete foundation, electrical connections, safety permits, inspection certificates. And that's assuming the thing still works after sitting in government storage for who knows how long. I don't have time for permits, Maya said quietly, or money for professional installation. I need to make this work with what I have. Something in her voice must have conveyed the desperation behind her determination because Dale's expression softened. Jerry mentioned you might be in a tight spot. Tell you what, I'll help you get it up and running, but I can't guarantee it'll meet code or pass any official inspections. Right now, I just need it to generate electricity. They spent the morning assembling the tower sections, with Lily serving as an enthusiastic assistant and amateur engineering consultant. Maya found herself drawing on her teaching background, explaining the physics of wind energy conversion as they worked. The kinetic energy of moving air gets transferred to the rotor blades, she told Lily as they examined the turbine's nacelle. The rotation drives a generator that converts mechanical energy into electrical energy we can use. Lily nodded seriously, then asked the question that had been nagging at Maya since yesterday. But Mama, how much electricity will it really make? Enough to keep our lights on. Maya paused in her explanation. The honest answer was that she didn't know. A residential wind turbine in Nebraska's variable wind conditions might generate anywhere from a few hundred to several thousand kilowatt-hours per month, depending on weather patterns and the machine's condition. Their current monthly electric bill averaged around 800 kilowatt-hours, costing them nearly $200 they couldn't afford. We'll have to measure it once we get everything connected, she said finally. That's what scientists do. We gather data and draw conclusions based on evidence. By afternoon, they had the tower erected and the turbine components assembled. Dale proved more knowledgeable than Maya had expected, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who understood machinery at an intuitive level. But it was when they began working on the electrical connections that Maya made the discovery that would change everything. This wiring harness is a lot more complex than it should be, Dale muttered, examining the turbine's internal systems. Most wind turbines just need basic power conditioning and grid connection equipment. This thing's got computer systems that belong in a data center. Maya leaned closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her exhaustion. Inside the turbine's housing, behind the main generator assembly, she could see sophisticated electronic equipment that had nothing to do with wind energy generation. Those are data storage drives, she said, recognizing the hardware from her years of teaching with computer-assisted learning systems. Multiple drives, all connected to some kind of encryption system. Dale frowned. Why would a wind turbine need to store data? Maya's mind raced through possibilities. Modern wind turbines did collect operational data, wind speeds, power output, maintenance schedules. But the equipment she was looking at seemed far more sophisticated than necessary for basic telemetry. Help me access this panel, she said, pointing to a hidden compartment she had noticed during the initial assembly. Inside, they found a complete computer system. Servers, networking equipment, and storage arrays that represented thousands of dollars in sophisticated hardware. Someone had modified this turbine to serve as a covert data center, disguised as renewable energy infrastructure. Mama, what does all this computer stuff do? Lily asked, peering at the electronic components with fascination. I don't know yet, sweetheart, but somebody went to a lot of trouble to hide it inside a wind turbine. Maya connected her laptop to the system's diagnostic port, hoping to understand what kind of data was stored on the drives. What she found made her stomach clench with a mixture of excitement and terror. The storage drives contained terabytes of encrypted files, far more information than any legitimate wind turbine operation could require. File names scrolled across her screen: tax_shelter_operations_2022, environmental_impact_suppression, price_manipulation regulatory documentation. Each folder contained hundreds of individual files, all locked behind encryption she couldn't crack with her basic software. "Dale," she said quietly, "I think someone has been using this turbine to store corporate secrets." "What kind of secrets?" Maya pointed to the file names on her screen. "The kind that companies spend millions to keep hidden." Her phone rang, interrupting their investigation. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. "Ms. Rodriguez? This is David Sterling, CEO of Tempest Energy Corporation. I understand you recently purchased some of our decommissioned equipment." Maya felt ice form in her veins. "How did you get this number?" "Ms. Rodriguez, we believe there may have been an administrative error in the government auction process. Some of our proprietary equipment was mistakenly included with the wind turbine you purchased. We'd like to arrange immediate recovery of our property." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya looked at Dale, who had moved closer to listen to the conversation. His expression had grown serious, almost worried. "What kind of proprietary equipment?" Maya asked. "Computer systems, data storage devices, that sort of thing. Nothing that would be useful to a private individual, but quite valuable to us from a corporate perspective. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for any inconvenience." "How substantial?" $50,000, immediate cash payment, for the return of our equipment and your agreement to maintain confidentiality about this matter." Maya's hands began to tremble. $50,000 would save their house, pay Lily's medical expenses, maybe even allow her to look for a teaching position without the desperate pressure of immediate survival. "I need time to consider your offer," she managed to say. "Of course. But Ms. Rodriguez, I want to stress the importance of handling this matter quickly and quietly. The information on our systems is highly sensitive. Accessing it could result in serious legal consequences for you." The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, then at the laptop screen showing encrypted files that a major corporation was desperate to reclaim. "Maya," Dale said quietly, "if they're offering $50,000 just to get this stuff back, it's worth a lot more than that. Or it's dangerous enough that they'll do anything to keep it secret." Lily had been listening to the adult conversation with the focused attention of a child who sensed something important happening. "Mama, are we going to be rich?" Maya knelt down to her daughter's eye level, struggling with the implications of what they had discovered. The wind turbine behind them continued its slow rotation, generating clean energy while harboring secrets that could either save their family or destroy it. "I don't know, baby, but I think we just found something that some very powerful people don't want anyone to see." As the Nebraska sun began to set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Maya realized her desperate gamble had led to something far bigger than renewable energy. She held in her hands the power to expose corporate corruption on a massive scale, if she was brave enough to use it, and if she could survive the consequences of that choice. As the Nebraska sun began to set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, Maya realized her desperate gamble had led to something far bigger than renewable energy. She held in her hands the power to expose corporate corruption on a massive scale, if she was brave enough to use it, and if she could survive the consequences of that choice. That evening, after Dale had left with promises to keep their discovery confidential, Maya researched Tempest Energy Corporation while Lily worked on homework nearby. What she found made her stomach churn. Tempest wasn't just another renewable company. They were a $2 billion energy giant with a disturbing pattern of mysteriously dropped lawsuits, minimal environmental fines, and whistleblowers who had quietly disappeared from public view. "Mama, you look worried," Lily observed, glancing up from her math worksheet. Maya closed her laptop and sat beside her daughter. Sometimes adults have to choose between what's safe and what's right. Do you understand? Lily nodded seriously. Like when Tommy Morrison was being mean to Sarah Chun, and I had to decide whether to tell the teacher even though Tommy said he'd be mean to me too. Exactly. But sometimes the bullies are much bigger than playground bullies. After Lily went to bed, Maya found Marcus Rivera's blog, Clean Energy, Dirty Secrets. His articles revealed deep understanding of renewable energy corruption and the moral conviction Maya recognized in herself. She sent an encrypted message. I may have information about Tempest Energy. Can we talk? His response came within hours. Tempest has been on my radar for 2 years. What kind of information? The kind they offered me $50,000 to keep secret. They met the next evening at Rosie's Diner, 20 miles from Maya's house. Marcus wasn't the cynical reporter she'd expected. He was quiet, thoughtful, with kind eyes and calloused hands suggesting he'd worked with more than keyboards. Maya explained everything. The desperate turbine purchase, the hidden computer systems, David Sterling's urgent call offering $50,000 for silence. For a single mother cleaning offices, that's not just money. That's salvation, Marcus said, stirring sugar into his coffee. It would solve every problem I have, Maya admitted. But I used to teach kids about renewable energy, about how technology could save the environment. If companies like Tempest are using clean energy as cover for corruption, everything I taught was built on lies. Marcus studied the file directory screenshots she'd printed. Tax shelter operations, environmental impact suppression, price manipulation. These aren't legitimate business files. No, he continued, leaning forward. These are evidence of criminal enterprise disguised as clean energy. I've investigated Tempest for 2 years without proving anything substantial. What you found could be the breakthrough we need. Or it could get us killed. Possibly. But it could expose massive fraud stealing from families across the Midwest while pretending to save the planet. How many homes have been lost to manipulated energy costs? How much environmental damage has been covered up? Maya thought about the communities that had suffered while Tempest profited behind a facade of environmental responsibility. If those files contain the fraud I suspect, Marcus explained, we're looking at hundreds of millions in fines. Whistleblower rewards range from 10 to 30% of recovered funds. Maya's breath caught. 30% of hundreds of millions? Potentially, but only if we can prove the crimes and survive whatever Tempest does to stop us. They sat in silence, understanding the magnitude of her choice. Tomorrow, Sterling would expect an answer to his $50,000 offer. I need help accessing those encrypted files, Maya said finally. I need to know what we're really dealing with. Marcus nodded. I know someone who might help, but once we start, there's no going back. And if I take their money and walk away, then families keep losing homes to price manipulation. Environmental damage gets covered up, and Tempest makes billions pretending to save the planet. Maya looked out at the parking lot, thinking about Lily trusting her to make the right choice. Tell me about this person who might help, she said quietly. Marcus smiled. His name is Jimmy Kowalski, and he used to work for Tempest Energy. 2 hours later, Maya found herself following Marcus down a rutted dirt road that led deep into the Sandhills region of Nebraska, where isolation wasn't just a lifestyle choice, it was a survival strategy. The GPS on her phone had lost signal 20 miles back, leaving her to trust Marcus's directions through a landscape that seemed designed to swallow secrets. Jimmy Kowalski's trailer sat in a depression between 2 hills, invisible from any main road and surrounded by the kind of electronic equipment that suggested either genius or paranoia. Solar panels covered every available surface, satellite dishes pointed in multiple directions, and the air hummed with the sound of cooling fans from computer servers housed in weatherproof containers. The man who answered their knock looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. Thin to the point of gauntness, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that never quite focused on any one thing for more than a few seconds, Jimmy Kowalski embodied the archetype of the brilliant engineer pushed past his breaking point. Marcus, he said, his voice carrying a nervous edge, you said this was urgent. And who's this? Jimmy, this is Maya Rodriguez. She's the one I told you about, the woman who bought the wind turbine. Jimmy's entire demeanor changed. His darting eyes focused on Maya with laser intensity, and she could see his hands trembling slightly as the implications registered. You bought it. The Vestas V27 from the government auction. It wasn't a question. Jesus Christ, Maya. Do you have any idea what you've stumbled into? That's what we're here to find out, Maya replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Marcus said you might be able to help us access the encrypted files. Jimmy laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only the bitter recognition of cosmic irony. Help you access them? Lady, I designed the encryption system that's protecting them. Those files represent 2 years of my life, 2 years of building the perfect digital vault to hide Tempest's crimes. And now they're sitting in your backyard, ticking like a time bomb. He led them inside the trailer, which had been converted into a sophisticated computer laboratory. Multiple monitors displayed scrolling code, network traffic analyses, and what appeared to be real-time monitoring of various corporate databases. Maya felt like she had stepped into the command center of a one-man war against corporate America. Tell me about the encryption, Marcus said, settling into a chair that had been salvaged from some long-defunct office building. Jimmy's hands moved nervously as he spoke, a programmer's habit of typing invisible code while explaining complex systems. I built it using military-grade AES-256 encryption with multiple layers of authentication. The idea was to create a system that could store sensitive corporate data in plain sight, wind turbines, solar installations, any piece of renewable energy infrastructure that nobody would think to examine closely. Why wind turbines? Maya asked. Because they're everywhere, they're connected to the internet for monitoring purposes, and they have enough internal space to house server equipment. Plus, who's going to suspect that a machine designed to generate clean energy is actually storing evidence of environmental crimes? Maya felt sick. So Tempest has been using renewable energy infrastructure as a cover for criminal activity. Not just a cover, Jimmy corrected, his voice growing more agitated. A storage network. They've got data centers hidden inside wind farms across 12 states. Tax evasion records, environmental impact studies they've suppressed, communications about bribing regulators, documentation of price manipulation schemes, all of it encrypted and distributed across hundreds of turbines that look like legitimate clean energy infrastructure. Marcus leaned forward. How much money are we talking about? Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, staring at his monitors as if they held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Conservative estimate? $210 million in tax evasion alone. But that's just what I saw before I left the company. The environmental damage they've covered up, the price manipulation that's cost consumers hundreds of millions more, we're looking at potentially the largest corporate fraud case in renewable energy history. Maya's breath caught. The number was so large it seemed abstract, almost meaningless. But then she thought about families losing their homes to manipulated energy prices, communities suffering environmental damage that was systematically covered up, and the scale of the betrayal became real. Why did you leave? She asked quietly. Jimmy's hands stopped their nervous movement, and for the first time since they arrived, he looked directly at her. Because I realized I was building a system to hide crimes that were hurting people like you. Families struggling to pay energy bills that were artificially inflated. Communities breathing polluted air because environmental studies were buried. I got into renewable energy because I wanted to help save the planet, not because I wanted to help corporations rape it more efficiently. So you quit. I tried to, but you don't just quit Tempest Energy when you know what I know. They made it clear that leaving the company would be problematic for my health and well-being. Maya understood. So you disappeared. I built myself a new identity, found this place, and I've been monitoring their network ever since, waiting for the right opportunity to bring them down. He gestured toward Maya. And now you've handed me the perfect opportunity. Marcus pulled out his laptop and connected to Jimmy's secure network. Can you decrypt the files on Maya's turbine? I can decrypt them because I designed the system. But Maya, you need to understand what we're talking about here. Once those files are opened, once we start analyzing the contents, Tempest will know. Their network monitoring will detect unauthorized access attempts, and they'll realize someone has the master keys to their entire criminal enterprise. What does that mean for my daughter? Maya asked, the question that had been haunting her since David Sterling's phone call. Jimmy was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. It means they'll try to eliminate the threat as quickly and efficiently as possible. These aren't people who send lawyers to handle problems. They send people who make problems disappear. Maya thought about Lily, asleep in their house while the wind turbine spun quietly outside her bedroom window. Her daughter, who still believed that renewable energy could save the world, who trusted that her mother would always make the right choice. But if we don't expose them, Maya said slowly, they continue destroying communities and manipulating energy prices. How many other families are going to lose their homes? How many children are going to grow up breathing polluted air because Tempest buried the environmental studies? Maya, Marcus said gently, this is your choice. We can walk away right now. You can take Sterling's $50,000 and try to build a quiet life for you and Lily. Or, Jimmy looked up from his keyboard. Or we decrypt those files, analyze the evidence, and build a case that could put the entire Tempest executive team in federal prison while recovering hundreds of millions of dollars for the communities they've defrauded. Maya stared at the bank of monitors surrounding them, each one displaying streams of data that represented corporate power and criminal conspiracy on a scale she had never imagined. Outside Jimmy's trailer, the Nebraska prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, empty and peaceful under the star-filled sky. If I do this, she said finally, if we decrypt those files and expose everything, what happens to people like Jimmy? People who built their careers helping corporations hide the truth? Jimmy's smile was sad but genuine. Maybe we finally get the chance to use our skills for something that actually matters. Maybe we stop being part of the problem and start being part of the solution. Marcus was already setting up secure communication channels, preparing for what would either be the biggest story of his career or the last story he ever wrote. Maya, once we start this process, there's no stopping it. Tempest will throw everything they have at containing this leak. Maya thought about her classroom, about the bright-eyed students who had hung on her every word as she explained how science could save the world. She thought about Lily's absolute faith that her mother would do the right thing, even when the right thing was terrifying. Jimmy, she said quietly, start decrypting the files. It's time to find out what Tempest Energy has been hiding. As Jimmy's fingers began flying across his keyboard, initiating decryption protocols he had hoped never to use again, Maya realized she had just committed herself and her daughter to a war against one of the most powerful corporations in America. The wind turbine in her backyard was no longer just a desperate attempt to keep the lights on. It had become the key to exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of corporate and political power. The first files began appearing on Jimmy's monitors within minutes, their contents promising to reshape everything Maya thought she knew about renewable energy, corporate responsibility, and the price of doing what's right in a world where wrong was often more profitable. 3 hours later, Maya sat in stunned silence as document after document scrolled across the screens. Internal Tempest memos discussing acceptable casualty rates from environmental contamination. Spreadsheets calculating the cost-effectiveness of covering up health studies versus implementing safety measures. Email chains between executives and regulatory officials that read like a corruption playbook. This one, Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper as he opened another file. This is the Riverside County incident from 2019. Tempest knew their solar installation was leaching heavy metals into groundwater that supplied 3 elementary schools. They spent $4 million on bribes and cover-up operations rather than the $2 million it would have cost to fix the contamination. Maya felt physically sick. How many children? The suppressed health study shows elevated lead levels in 340 kids. Learning disabilities, developmental delays, behavioral problems, all preventable if Tempest had spent less on concealment and more on actual environmental responsibility. Marcus was furiously taking notes, cross-referencing dates and locations with news reports he pulled up on his laptop. This explains the pattern I've been seeing. Communities near Tempest facilities with unexplained health clusters, environmental groups that suddenly lose funding, journalists who get reassigned to different beats right when they start asking uncomfortable questions. Maya's phone rang, interrupting their horrified fascination with Tempest's documented crimes. The caller ID showed David Sterling's number, exactly what Jimmy had predicted would happen once the decryption began. "They know," Jimmy said, glancing at his network monitoring displays. "Unauthorized access detected 23 minutes ago. Their security team is already mobilizing." Maya stared at her ringing phone, understanding that answering it would mark another point of no return. But the images of those poisoned children made the choice simple. "Mr. Sterling," she said, accepting the call. "Ms. Rodriguez." His voice carried none of the polished corporate courtesy from their previous conversation. "I'm very disappointed in your decision to involve outside parties in what should have been a simple business transaction. I don't know what you're talking about. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm calling from my car. I'm currently 15 minutes from your property, accompanied by a technical team that specializes in data recovery and security issues. I strongly recommend that you reconsider our previous offer before this situation becomes more complicated." Maya's blood turned to ice. "You're threatening me. I'm offering you one final opportunity to resolve this matter professionally. $100,000, cash, immediate transfer, for the complete return of our property and your signed agreement to maintain confidentiality." The offer had doubled, confirming everything Jimmy had warned about corporate desperation when their crimes were exposed. But Maya thought about those 340 children in Riverside County, about other communities suffering while Tempest executives calculated the cost of human lives against quarterly profit margins. "I'm not interested in your money," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Then you're interested in federal prison, Ms. Rodriguez. Corporate espionage is a serious crime. Breaking federal encryption carries mandatory minimum sentences. Your daughter will be 8 years old when you're released, if you're fortunate." Maya felt her hands shaking, but Marcus was already gesturing for her attention. He held up his laptop screen showing a legal document about whistleblower protections. "Mr. Sterling, I believe accessing evidence of corporate crimes in the public interest is protected under federal whistleblower statutes." The silence on Sterling's end stretched long enough that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice carried a cold fury that made her realize how far they had pushed one of the most powerful men in American energy. "Ms. Rodriguez, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Tempest Energy employs 12,000 people across 14 states. We provide clean energy to over 2 million households. We have contracts with federal agencies, partnerships with environmental groups, and political relationships that span both parties. You are one desperate single mother with a stolen computer. Do you really believe the system will choose your version of truth over ours? I believe the evidence will speak for itself. Evidence obtained through criminal hacking will be inadmissible in any court proceeding. Evidence held by someone who mysteriously disappears will be worthless. Evidence possessed by someone whose credibility has been destroyed through charges of corporate espionage and child endangerment will be meaningless." The threat was explicit now, and Maya felt terror mixing with rage in her chest. Child endangerment? Single mothers who involve their children in criminal conspiracies often find themselves investigated by Child Protective Services, especially when those mothers are struggling financially and demonstrating poor judgment about their children's welfare. Maya's vision blurred with fury. Threatening her was one thing. Threatening to take Lily away was something else entirely. "You bastard. Ms. Rodriguez, I'll be at your property in 10 minutes. Have our equipment ready for immediate transfer, or face the consequences of your poor decisions." The call ended. Maya stared at her phone, then at Jimmy and Marcus, both of whom had heard enough to understand the stakes had just escalated beyond anything they had imagined. "He's going to try to take Lily," Maya said, her voice barely controlled. Marcus was already moving toward the door. "We need to get you and your daughter somewhere safe before he arrives." "No," Maya said, standing up with sudden resolve. "I'm not running. Lily is at home, probably asleep, trusting that her mother will protect her. And these files?" She gestured at the monitors still displaying Tempest's crimes. "These files represent hundreds of families who've been poisoned, cheated, and lied to buy these people. I won't let Sterling bully me into silence." Jimmy looked up from his computers, where he was frantically copying files to secure servers. Maya, Sterling isn't coming alone. Corporate security teams aren't customer service representatives. They're former military, former intelligence, people who understand that some problems are best solved permanently. Then what do you suggest? Marcus was already on his phone. I'm calling Detective Ray Thompson. If Sterling shows up at your property with a technical team, we want local law enforcement aware and involved. Maya nodded, then turned to Jimmy. How much of the data can you preserve if they confiscate the turbine? Everything. I've been copying files to secure servers since we started the decryption. Even if they recover the original equipment, the evidence will be safe. Maya felt something shift inside her. A transformation from the desperate woman who had bid on a wind turbine 3 days ago to someone who understood she was fighting for more than her own survival. Then let's make sure they understand what they're up against, she said. Jimmy, how quickly can you prepare a data summary for Marcus to publish? Something that establishes the scope of Tempest's crimes before Sterling arrives? 20 minutes, maybe less. Marcus, can you get a story online that fast? I can get the basics published through my blog and sent to major news outlets simultaneously. Once it's public, Sterling can't claim this is simple corporate espionage. Maya looked at the monitors displaying evidence of corporate crimes that had affected millions of people. Outside Jimmy's trailer, the Nebraska prairie remained peaceful under the star-filled sky, but she knew that peace was about to be shattered by a confrontation that would determine whether truth could triumph over corporate power. Do it, she said. All of it. And then we go to my house and face whatever Sterling brings with him. As Jimmy's fingers flew across his keyboard and Marcus began crafting the story that would expose Tempest Energy's crimes to the world, Maya realized she was no longer the desperate single mother who had gambled her last dollars on a wind turbine. She was now a woman who had chosen to stand between corporate corruption and the communities it destroyed, even if that choice might cost her everything she had left to lose. The war between Maya Rodriguez and Tempest Energy was about to begin, and the first shots would be fired in her own backyard. Maya's hands shook as she called Detective Ray Thompson's personal number, the one Elena Vasquez had given her months ago when Tom's drinking had escalated to the point where restraining orders became necessary. Ray had been patient then, understanding the complex dynamics that kept abused women trapped in cycles of fear and financial dependency. Now she prayed that same patience would extend to corporate crime. Maya. Ray's voice carried the alert concern of a cop receiving a late-night call from someone he knew to be in genuine trouble. What's wrong? Ray, I need help. I've stumbled into something big, something dangerous, and there are men on their way to my house right now who might hurt me and Lily. I'm listening. Maya quickly explained the wind turbine purchase, the hidden files, and David Sterling's threats. She could hear Ray's breathing change as he processed the implications. Corporate espionage accusations, federal crimes, child protective services threats. Ray repeated slowly. Maya, this is way beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. I know, but these people are coming to my property in the next few minutes, and I need someone there who can witness whatever happens. Someone who can make sure Lily stays safe. Ray was quiet for a long moment. Maya could picture him in his kitchen, probably drinking coffee despite the late hour, weighing his responsibilities as a local officer against the reality of going up against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I'll be there in 15 minutes, he said finally. And Maya, don't answer the door until I arrive. The next call was harder. Elena Vasquez had been organizing communities against corporate interests for 30 years, but she had also seen what happened to people who challenged power structures with unlimited resources. Mija. Elena's voice carried the warmth of someone who had spent decades nurturing other people's fights for justice. It's midnight. Are you in trouble? Maya explained everything again, this time focusing on the evidence of environmental damage affecting communities across the Midwest. Elena's responses grew more engaged as the scope of Tempest's crimes became clear. 340 poisoned children, Elena repeated, her voice hardening with the righteous anger Maya remembered from their conversations about Tom's abuse. And how many other communities that we don't know about yet? That's just one incident from the files we've decoded so far. There are hundreds more. Maya, what do you need from me? Help, protection. Maybe people who can witness whatever happens tonight and make sure the story gets told even if something happens to me. Elena was quiet for less than 30 seconds. I'm making calls. Within an hour, you'll have half the county at your property. We've been waiting for someone brave enough to take on these corporate parasites. You've given us the evidence we need to fight back. As Maya drove back toward her property with Marcus beside her and Jimmy following in his own vehicle, she tried to process how quickly her life had transformed. 3 days ago, she had been a desperate single mother whose biggest worry was keeping the electricity on. Now she was the focal point of what might become the largest corporate fraud case in renewable energy history. Maya, Marcus said quietly, are you sure about this? Going back to your house, we could take Lily and disappear for a while, let federal investigators handle Tempest from here. Maya thought about the children in Riverside County, about families across the Midwest paying inflated energy bills to fund Tempest's criminal enterprise, about communities suffering environmental damage while executives calculated the cost of human lives against quarterly profits. I spent 7 years teaching kids that science could save the world, she said. That renewable energy represented hope for their future. If I run now, if I let Tempest bury this evidence, then everything I taught them was a lie. They arrived at Maya's property to find Detective Ray Thompson's patrol car already parked in the driveway, his emergency lights casting red and blue shadows across the slowly spinning wind turbine. Ray emerged from his car as Maya pulled up, his expression serious but determined. Maya, I've been thinking about what you told me. If even half of what you described is true, this affects my entire community. Every family paying electric bills, every kid drinking water that might be contaminated, every small business struggling with energy costs that are being artificially inflated. It's all true, Ray. We have documentation. Then we do this right. Legal, by the book, with witnesses and proper procedures. As if summoned by Ray's words, headlights began appearing on the rural road leading to Maya's house. Elena's network was mobilizing with the efficiency of people who had spent years fighting battles against powerful interests. Cars and pickup trucks lined the gravel driveway and pulled into the adjacent field, their occupants emerging with the quiet determination of a community that had finally found a reason to stand up. Maya recognized many faces from the farmer's market where she sold vegetables. The Johnsons, whose dairy farm had been struggling with mysteriously high energy costs. Maria Santos, whose family had moved from Colorado after her youngest son developed asthma near a Tempest solar installation. Dave Chun, whose trucking company had been driven to near bankruptcy by fuel costs that never seemed to correlate with market prices. Elena arrived in her ancient Ford pickup, accompanied by 2 women Maya didn't recognize but who carried themselves with the authority of people accustomed to organizing resistance movements. Maya, Elena said, embracing her with the fierce affection of a mother protecting her own child. Meet Sarah Kim, she's a labor organizer from Lincoln, and Janet Morrison. Yes, related to Jerry Morrison, but she's been fighting corporate environmental crimes for the Sierra Club. Within 30 minutes, Maya's property had been transformed into something resembling a peaceful occupation. People brought folding chairs, thermoses of coffee, battery-powered lights, and the kind of quiet resolve that comes from finally having a concrete target for years of accumulated frustration with corporate power. Jimmy had set up his mobile computer equipment on Maya's kitchen table, continuing to decrypt and analyze files while providing real-time updates to Marcus, who was coordinating with national environmental journalists and federal whistleblower attorneys. The Riverside County documentation is just the beginning, Jimmy reported to the assembled group. I'm finding evidence of systematically suppressed environmental studies in 8 states. Air quality data that was altered, water contamination reports that were buried, health studies that were purchased and then concealed. Maya stood in her living room, looking out at her neighbors and strangers who had come to support her fight, and felt something she hadn't experienced since losing her teaching job: the power of community solidarity. These people understood that her battle against Tempest was also their battle against an economic system that prioritized corporate profits over community welfare. At 12:47 a.m., headlights appeared at the far end of the access road. Not the single-file arrival of community supporters, but a convoy moving with military precision. 3 black SUVs approached Maya's property at deliberate speed, their occupants invisible behind tinted windows. "That's them?" Maya said quietly, though everyone had already noticed the change in atmosphere. Detective Ray Thompson moved to the front of the group, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Everyone stay calm. We're here to witness and document whatever happens. Nobody does anything that could be construed as threatening or illegal." Elena stepped beside Maya, taking her hand with surprising strength. "Mija, whatever happens next, you've already won. These files are public now. The story is being told, and these people," she gestured at the assembled community, "they're not going to forget what you've shown them about corporate power." Maya squeezed Elena's hand and looked at her neighbors, her allies, her daughter's future reflected in their determined faces. The wind turbine continued its steady rotation behind them, generating clean energy and serving as a monument to the idea that sometimes the most powerful weapons are hidden in the most innocent places. David Sterling and his corporate security team were about to discover that intimidating one desperate single mother was very different from intimidating an entire community that had finally found a reason to fight back. The real battle for the soul of American renewable energy was about to begin, and Maya Rodriguez was no longer fighting alone. The 3 black SUVs stopped in perfect formation at the edge of Maya's property, their engines idling with mechanical precision. For several minutes, nothing happened. Maya could see figures moving behind the tinted windows, corporate security assessing the situation, counting potential threats, calculating risk factors they hadn't anticipated. Detective Ray Thompson stepped forward, his hand still resting casually on his service weapon. "This is private property. State your business." The driver's door of the lead vehicle opened, and David Sterling emerged with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. He was younger than Maya had expected, maybe 45, with prematurely silver hair and the kind of expensive casual wear that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Behind him, 6 men in dark suits arranged themselves with the practiced spacing of professional security personnel. "Detective Thompson," Sterling said, apparently having researched everyone involved in the situation. "I'm David Sterling, CEO of Tempest Energy Corporation. I'm here to retrieve corporate property that was mistakenly included in a government auction." "At 1 in the morning? With a security detail?" Sterling's smile never wavered, but Maya caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes. He hadn't expected an audience, much less official law enforcement presence. "Sometimes business requires unusual hours, Detective. Ms. Rodriguez and I had a previous conversation about this matter. I'm simply here to conclude our negotiations." Maya stepped forward, Elena and Marcus flanking her like bodyguards. The sight of so many community members clearly unsettled Sterling's security team, who had probably prepared for intimidating a single frightened woman, not confronting an organized group of witnesses. "Mr. Sterling, our negotiations concluded when you threatened to have my daughter taken away from me. I'm not interested in any further discussions." "Ms. Rodriguez, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could speak privately?" "Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of my neighbors." Sterling's professional mask slipped slightly. Maya could see him calculating new strategies, adapting to circumstances that his corporate playbook hadn't anticipated. "Very well. Ms. Rodriguez, you are currently in possession of proprietary corporate data obtained through illegal means. Return our equipment immediately, and Tempest Energy will not pursue federal charges for corporate espionage." Jimmy Kowalski stepped out of Maya's house, carrying a laptop that displayed scrolling data feeds. "Mr. Sterling, I'm James Kowalski. I used to work for you." Sterling's composure cracked visibly. "Jimmy, I wondered when you would surface again." "You mean you wondered when I'd grow a conscience and decide to stop hiding corporate crimes? You signed confidentiality agreements, Jimmy. Multiple contracts with severe financial penalties for disclosure. I also swore an oath as an engineer to prioritize public safety over corporate profits. Turns out that oath matters more to me than your legal threats." Maya watched the exchange, recognizing the dynamics of corporate intimidation she had experienced herself. But Jimmy was no longer the frightened engineer who had disappeared from Tempest 2 years ago. standing surrounded by community support, with evidence of massive corporate fraud displayed on his laptop. He had found the courage to face his former employer. "Mr. Sterling," Detective Thompson interrupted, "I'm going to need to see some identification and documentation for your associates here." Sterling gestured toward his security team, and Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of the men was scanning the crowd with the focused attention of someone identifying specific individuals. Another was photographing license plates with a professional camera. They weren't just here to retrieve equipment. They were gathering intelligence on everyone who had chosen to support her. "Detective, my associates are private security personnel properly licensed in Nebraska. We're simply here to recover stolen corporate property." The property in question was purchased legally at a government auction, Elena interjected, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought similar battles for decades. "If Tempest Energy has concerns about the auction process, they should file complaints through appropriate legal channels." "Mrs. Vasquez, isn't it?" Sterling had clearly done his homework on everyone involved. "I understand you have a history of organizing resistance to legitimate business operations. I hope you understand that encouraging illegal activity could have serious consequences for your own legal status." Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Honey, I've been threatened by bigger corporations than yours, usually right before they got their asses handed to them by communities that refused to be intimidated." Maya felt a surge of pride in her neighbor's fearlessness, but she also recognized that Sterling was systematically cataloging everyone present, building files that Tempest could use for future retaliation. "Mr. Sterling," she said, drawing his attention back to her, "you've made your position clear. Now let me make mine clear. The data on that wind turbine shows evidence of massive fraud, environmental crimes that have poisoned children, and price manipulation that has stolen millions of dollars from working families. That information is now in the hands of federal investigators, environmental journalists, and legal advocates. Threatening me won't change that." Sterling's eyes hardened with the cold fury of someone unused to being defied. "Ms. Rodriguez, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Tempest Energy has relationships with federal agencies, environmental organizations, and political leaders across the country. We provide clean energy to millions of people, employ thousands of workers, and contribute billions to local economies. Do you really believe anyone will care about your conspiracy theories when weighed against those economic realities? They'll care about poisoned children, alleged environmental issues that will be thoroughly investigated through proper channels, issues that may prove to be the result of pre-existing conditions, natural contamination, or entirely unrelated factors." Maya felt her anger rising at Sterling's casual dismissal of documented suffering. 340 kids in Riverside County with lead poisoning isn't an allegation. It's a crime you covered up. Alleged lead poisoning from alleged contamination with alleged corporate responsibility. Sterling's voice carried the practiced dismissiveness of someone skilled at using legal language to obscure moral reality. "Ms. Rodriguez, accusations require proof. Proof requires admissible evidence. And evidence obtained through illegal hacking will never see the inside of a courtroom." Marcus stepped forward, holding up his phone. "Mr. Sterling, this conversation is being recorded and live-streamed to multiple news outlets. Would you like to repeat your position on poisoned children for the public record?" Sterling's security team moved slightly, responding to what they perceived as a threat to their principal. Maya noticed Detective Thompson's posture shift in response, his hand moving closer to his weapon. The tension in the air thickened as two opposing forces, corporate power and community resistance, faced each other in Maya's front yard. The wind turbine continued its steady rotation behind them, its blades catching the lights from the assembled cars and creating shifting shadows across the confrontation. "Mr. Sterling," Ray Thompson said quietly, "I think it's time for you and your associates to leave. This is private property, you weren't invited, and you're making the residents uncomfortable." Sterling looked around the assembled crowd one final time, his expression calculating potential responses to a situation that had spiraled beyond his control. Maya realized he was memorizing faces, building target lists for future corporate retaliation. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said finally, This isn't over. Tempest Energy protects its interests through all available means. Legal, political, economic, and otherwise. I hope you've considered what that might mean for your daughter's future. The threat was explicit now, delivered in front of witnesses including a law enforcement officer. Maya felt terror and rage warring in her chest, but Elena's hand on her shoulder reminded her that she wasn't facing this alone. "Mr. Sterling," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I've spent the last 3 days learning what your company has done to families like mine. Children poisoned, communities destroyed, families driven into poverty by your price manipulation. My daughter's future is already threatened by people like you. The only question is whether I'm going to let that continue." Sterling nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had already suspected. "Then we understand each other perfectly." He turned and walked back toward his SUV, his security team following with the disciplined precision of professionals who understood that this confrontation was ending, but the larger conflict was just beginning. As the convoy pulled away, Maya realized that exposing Tempest's crimes had been the easy part. Surviving the corporate retaliation that would follow would require every ounce of courage and community support she could muster. As the convoy pulled away, Maya realized that exposing Tempest's crimes had been the easy part. Surviving the corporate retaliation that would follow would require every ounce of courage and community support she could muster. The first call came at 6:47 a.m., barely 3 hours after Sterling's departure. Maya's phone displayed a number she didn't recognize, but Jimmy's computer screens showed incoming traffic that made him look up sharply. "Don't answer," he warned. "Tempest's crisis management team is mobilizing. They're about to flood you with calls from lawyers, investigators, maybe even fake journalists trying to get you to say something compromising." Maya let the call go to voicemail, then another, then a dozen more. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from numbers across the country, each one representing another tentacle of Tempest's damage control operation. Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee and the grim expression of someone who had been making her own phone calls. "Mija, it's starting. 3 of my neighbors got visits from men in suits at 5 this morning. Routine questions about the disturbance at the Rodriguez property," they said. "Peggy Johnson was so scared she's talking about leaving town for a few weeks." Maya felt her stomach clench. This was exactly what Sterling had threatened: systematic pressure on anyone who had supported her. How many people are they targeting? Everyone whose license plate they photographed last night. They're moving fast, trying to isolate you by making your supporters too frightened to stay involved. Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he had been coordinating with environmental journalists across the country. "Maya, we have a narrow window here. Once Tempest's legal and PR machine gets fully engaged, they'll control the narrative. We need to get ahead of their story." "What story?" "Desperate single mother steals corporate data in misguided attempt to solve financial problems. Mentally unstable woman manipulated by radical environmental activists. Former teacher with history of poor judgment endangers her own child through criminal behavior." Maya felt the familiar chill of recognizing how corporate power could reshape reality through carefully crafted messaging. She had seen it happen to other whistleblowers, their credibility destroyed, their motives questioned, their personal lives dissected until the original crimes they exposed became secondary to the scandal of their exposure. "They're already building the file," Jimmy added, pointing to his monitoring displays. "Private investigators pulling your employment records, divorce proceedings, financial history. By tonight, they'll have a comprehensive attack on your character ready for deployment." Detective Ray Thompson finished a phone call and rejoined their conversation, his expression troubled. "Maya, I just talked to my captain. We're getting pressure from the county commissioners to classify last night's gathering as an unlawful assembly. Apparently, several prominent local business leaders received calls this morning expressing concern about anti-business extremism in our county. How is standing on my own property supporting a neighbor an unlawful assembly? It's not. But Maya, you need to understand what you're up against. Tempest doesn't just have lawyers and money, they have relationships. County commissioners who depend on corporate tax revenue, state legislators who receive campaign contributions, federal regulators who hope for lucrative private sector jobs after their government service ends. Maya walked to her front window, looking out at the wind turbine that had started this entire cascade of events. Its blades turned steadily in the morning breeze, generating clean energy while harboring the secrets that were about to reshape her life completely. Marcus, what exactly are you proposing? Coordinated media release. I published the core findings on my blog while simultaneously sending the technical documentation to environmental journalists at major outlets. Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN. We also send everything to federal enforcement agencies and congressional oversight committees. All at once, within a 2-hour window. Make it impossible for Tempest to contain the story or control which aspects get attention. Maya's phone rang again, this time showing a number she recognized with dread. Her ex-husband Tom. She decided to answer, knowing that avoiding him would only intensify his persistent harassment. Maya, I've been hearing some very interesting stories about corporate executives visiting your house last night. Tom's voice carried the calculating enthusiasm that always preceded his worst behavior. Something about valuable computer equipment, federal crimes, maybe even reward money? Tom, I can't discuss this with you. The hell you can't. Lily's my daughter, and if you've gotten yourself involved in some kind of corporate lawsuit, I have rights. Legal rights to any settlement money, parental rights to protect my daughter from your poor decisions. Maya felt her anger flare. Even in the middle of the most dangerous situation of her life, Tom was thinking about money and leverage. Tom, I'm hanging up now. Maya, listen to me carefully. I know people who work for companies that do business with these energy corporations. If you're sitting on something valuable, we can work together. Split whatever you get 50-50. Use my connections to negotiate better terms. Your connections? You mean the bookies and loan sharks you owe money to? I mean legitimate business contacts who understand how corporate settlements work. Maya, you're in over your head. You need someone who knows how to navigate these waters. Maya ended the call, but she knew Tom wouldn't give up. Her ex-husband had an instinct for finding opportunities in other people's crises, and his gambling debts made him desperate enough to complicate any situation for potential profit. We have maybe 4 hours before Tempest's full response kicks in, Jimmy said, monitoring corporate network activity. Legal injunctions, character assassination campaigns, pressure on media outlets. They're treating this like a national security threat. Elena sat down beside Maya, taking her hand with surprising gentleness. Mija, I've seen this before. The moment before everything changes. You can still walk away. Take Sterling's money, sign his papers, try to build a quiet life somewhere else. And let them keep poisoning children? Keep manipulating energy prices that drive families into poverty? Or you can fight, knowing that fighting means giving up any chance of a normal life for you and Lily. Once you become the public face of this story, there's no going back to teaching, no quiet farmers market weekends, no anonymous small-town life. Maya thought about Lily, still sleeping upstairs, who had never asked to become the daughter of America's most famous environmental whistleblower. She thought about the families in Riverside County whose children had been poisoned while Tempest executives calculated the cost of human lives against quarterly profits. If I don't fight, if I take their money and stay quiet, what kind of person does that make me? What kind of mother? What kind of example am I setting for Lily about standing up to bullies? Marcus had been quietly preparing the media release package, but now he looked up at Maya with serious intensity. Once we send this out, everything changes. You'll be testifying before Congress, probably relocated for safety, definitely the target of the most sophisticated corporate attack machine in America. But the evidence will be public. The crimes will be exposed. Other families won't have to suffer what we've suffered. Yes, but Maya, I need you to understand. Tempest won't just try to discredit you. They'll try to destroy you. Your finances, your reputation, your relationship with your daughter, everything that matters to you. Maya stood up, feeling something crystallize inside her. The same determination that had carried her through her divorce, through losing her teaching job, through months of financial desperation. Then we'd better make sure the evidence is strong enough to survive their attacks. Jimmy's hands moved across his keyboard with decisive speed. Uploading complete data archive to WikiLeaks, Environmental Working Group, and federal whistleblower databases. Once it's distributed across multiple platforms, they can't suppress it. Marcus. Sending alerts to 53 environmental journalists, 12 congressional oversight staffers, and 6 federal enforcement agencies. Everything goes out in 30 seconds. Maya took a deep breath, understanding that she was about to cross a threshold from which there could be no return. Do it. As notifications began flashing across Jimmy's screens and Marcus's phone started ringing with calls from major news outlets, Maya realized she had just transformed from a desperate single mother into the central figure in what would become the largest environmental fraud case in American history. The war between Maya Rodriguez and Tempest Energy was about to become public, and the entire American renewable energy industry would never be the same. As the convoy pulled away, Maya realized that exposing Tempest's crimes had been the easy part. Surviving the corporate retaliation that would follow would require every ounce of courage and community support she could muster. The first call came at 6:47 a.m., barely 3 hours after Sterling's departure. Maya's phone displayed a number she didn't recognize, but Jimmy's computer screens showed incoming traffic that made him look up sharply. "Don't answer," he warned. "Tempest's crisis management team is mobilizing. They're about to flood you with calls from lawyers, investigators, maybe even fake journalists trying to get you to say something compromising." Maya let the call go to voicemail, then another, then a dozen more. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from numbers across the country, each one representing another tentacle of Tempest's damage control operation. Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee and the grim expression of someone who had been making her own phone calls. "Mija, it's starting. 3 of my neighbors got visits from men in suits at 5 this morning. Routine questions about the disturbance at the Rodriguez property," they said. "Peggy Johnson was so scared she's talking about leaving town for a few weeks." Maya felt her stomach clench. This was exactly what Sterling had threatened: systematic pressure on anyone who had supported her. How many people are they targeting? Everyone whose license plate they photographed last night. They're moving fast, trying to isolate you by making your supporters too frightened to stay involved. Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he had been coordinating with environmental journalists across the country. "Maya, we have a narrow window here. Once Tempest's legal and PR machine gets fully engaged, they'll control the narrative. We need to get ahead of their story." "What story?" "Desperate single mother steals corporate data in misguided attempt to solve financial problems. Mentally unstable woman manipulated by radical environmental activists. Former teacher with history of poor judgment endangers her own child through criminal behavior." Maya felt the familiar chill of recognizing how corporate power could reshape reality through carefully crafted messaging. She had seen it happen to other whistleblowers, their credibility destroyed, their motives questioned, their personal lives dissected until the original crimes they exposed became secondary to the scandal of their exposure. "They're already building the file," Jimmy added, pointing to his monitoring displays. "Private investigators pulling your employment records, divorce proceedings, financial history. By tonight, they'll have a comprehensive attack on your character ready for deployment." Detective Ray Thompson finished a phone call and rejoined their conversation, his expression troubled. "Maya, I just talked to my captain. We're getting pressure from the county commissioners to classify last night's gathering as an unlawful assembly. Apparently, several prominent local business leaders received calls this morning expressing concern about anti-business extremism in our county. How is standing on my own property supporting a neighbor an unlawful assembly? It's not. But Maya, you need to understand what you're up against. Tempest doesn't just have lawyers and money, they have relationships. County commissioners who depend on corporate tax revenue, state legislators who receive campaign contributions, federal regulators who hope for lucrative private sector jobs after their government service ends." Maya walked to her front window, looking out at the wind turbine that had started this entire cascade of events. Its blades turned steadily in the morning breeze, generating clean energy while harboring the secrets that were about to reshape her life completely. "Marcus, What exactly are you proposing? Coordinated media release. I published the core findings on my blog while simultaneously sending the technical documentation to environmental journalists at major outlets. Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN. We also send everything to federal enforcement agencies and congressional oversight committees. All at once. Within a 2-hour window. Make it impossible for Tempest to contain the story or control which aspects get attention. Maya's phone rang again, this time showing a number she recognized with dread. Her ex-husband Tom. She decided to answer, knowing that avoiding him would only intensify his persistent harassment. Maya, I've been hearing some very interesting stories about corporate executives visiting your house last night. Tom's voice carried the calculating enthusiasm that always preceded his worst behavior. Something about valuable computer equipment, federal crimes, maybe even reward money? Tom, I can't discuss this with you. The hell you can't. Lily's my daughter, and if you've gotten yourself involved in some kind of corporate lawsuit, I have rights. Legal rights to any settlement money, parental rights to protect my daughter from your poor decisions. Maya felt her anger flare. Even in the middle of the most dangerous situation of her life, Tom was thinking about money and leverage. Tom, I'm hanging up now. Maya, listen to me carefully. I know people who work for companies that do business with these energy corporations. If you're sitting on something valuable, we can work together. Split whatever you get 50-50, use my connections to negotiate better terms. Your connections? You mean the bookies and loan sharks you owe money to? I mean legitimate business contacts who understand how corporate settlements work. Maya, you're in over your head. You need someone who knows how to navigate these waters. Maya ended the call, but she knew Tom wouldn't give up. Her ex-husband had an instinct for finding opportunities in other people's crises, and his gambling debts made him desperate enough to complicate any situation for potential profit. We have maybe 4 hours before Tempest's full response kicks in, Jimmy said, monitoring corporate network activity. Legal injunctions, character assassination campaigns, pressure on media outlets. They're treating this like a national security threat. Elena sat down beside Maya, taking her hand with surprising gentleness. Mija, I've seen this before. The moment before everything changes. You can still walk away. Take Sterling's money, sign his papers, try to build a quiet life somewhere else. And let them keep poisoning children? Keep manipulating energy prices that drive families into poverty? Or you can fight, knowing that fighting means giving up any chance of a normal life for you and Lily. Once you become the public face of this story, there's no going back to teaching, no quiet farmers market weekends, no anonymous small-town life. Maya thought about Lily, still sleeping upstairs, who had never asked to become the daughter of America's most famous environmental whistleblower. She thought about the families in Riverside County whose children had been poisoned while Tempest executives calculated the cost of human lives against quarterly profits. If I don't fight, if I take their money and stay quiet, what kind of person does that make me? What kind of mother? What kind of example am I setting for Lily about standing up to bullies? Marcus had been quietly preparing the media release package, but now he looked up at Maya with serious intensity. Once we send this out, everything changes. You'll be testifying before Congress, probably relocated for safety, definitely the target of the most sophisticated corporate attack machine in America. But the evidence will be public. The crimes will be exposed. Other families won't have to suffer what we've suffered. Yes, but Maya, I need you to understand. Tempest won't just try to discredit you. They'll try to destroy you. Your finances, your reputation, your relationship with your daughter, everything that matters to you. Maya stood up, feeling something crystallize inside her. The same determination that had carried her through her divorce, through losing her teaching job, through months of financial desperation. Then we'd better make sure the evidence is strong enough to survive their attacks. Jimmy's hands moved across his keyboard with decisive speed, uploading complete data archive to WikiLeaks, Environmental Working Group, and federal whistleblower databases. Once it's distributed across multiple platforms, they can't suppress it. Marcus, sending alerts to 53 environmental journalists, 12 congressional oversight staffers, and 6 federal enforcement agencies. Everything goes out in 30 seconds. Maya took a deep breath, understanding that she was about to cross a threshold from which there could be no return. Do it. As notifications began flashing across Jimmy's screens and Marcus's phone started ringing with calls from major news outlets, Maya realized she had just transformed from a desperate single mother into the central figure in what would become the largest environmental fraud case in American history. The war between Maya Rodriguez and Tempest Energy was about to become public, and the entire American renewable energy industry would never be the same. 6 months later, Maya sat in a congressional hearing room, her hand raised as she swore to tell the truth about corporate crimes that had shocked the nation. The mahogany-paneled chamber buzzed with reporters, federal investigators, and environmental advocates who had traveled from across the country to witness Tempest Energy's public reckoning. The intervening months had transformed Maya's life beyond recognition. The initial media explosion had crashed Tempest's stock price by 60% within hours of her revelations going public. Federal raids on corporate offices in 8 states had recovered additional evidence of environmental cover-ups affecting over 2 million people. David Sterling had resigned in disgrace, though he maintained his innocence through increasingly desperate press conferences. Ms. Rodriguez, the committee chairman began, in your own words, please tell us what you discovered in that wind turbine. Maya leaned toward the microphone, thinking about the journey from desperate single mother to the woman Time magazine had called the conscience of clean energy. Lily sat in the gallery behind her, now 9 years old and proud of her mother's courage, though she still sometimes missed their quiet life on the Nebraska farm. I discovered that Tempest Energy had systematically poisoned communities, manipulated energy prices, and corrupted regulatory processes while claiming to champion environmental protection, Maya said clearly. They used renewable energy infrastructure as cover for criminal enterprise. The numbers that followed were staggering. $847 million in fraudulent tax shelters. Environmental damage affecting 43 communities across 12 states. Price manipulation that had cost consumers over $200 million annually. Health impacts documented in thousands of children and adults living near Tempest facilities. Victoria Sterling, David's former VP of Strategic Operations, had become the prosecution's key witness after her own arrest. Her testimony revealed the corporate culture that had prioritized profits over human safety with chilling calculation. We called them acceptable losses, Victoria had testified the previous week. Communities that would be harmed by our operations, but whose legal challenges we could afford to manage through settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Maya watched Victoria's televised testimony from the federal safe house where she and Lily now lived, surrounded by marshals and the constant awareness that corporate retaliation remained a threat. Tom had tried to insert himself into the media narrative, claiming credit for encouraging Maya's investigation, but his credibility had crumbled when reporters discovered his gambling debts and history of domestic violence. The whistleblower reward had been substantial, $89 million, 30% of the federal fines assessed against Tempest. But the money felt less significant than the changes her actions had sparked. New federal oversight of renewable energy companies, mandatory environmental monitoring at all clean energy installations, and criminal prosecution of corporate executives who suppressed health studies. Elena Vasquez had become a national figure herself, organizing environmental justice communities across the Midwest. Jimmy Kowalski now worked for the EPA, designing systems to prevent the kind of data manipulation he had once enabled. Marcus Rivera's book about corporate environmental crimes had become a bestseller. Ms. Rodriguez, a congressman asked, do you regret your decision to expose Tempest's crimes? Maya thought about the families in Riverside County whose children were receiving medical treatment for lead poisoning. About communities that now had access to clean water after Tempest's contamination was remediated. About the renewable energy companies that were implementing genuine environmental protections because they knew they were being watched. I regret that it was necessary, she replied, but I don't regret doing what was right. As the hearing concluded, Maya realized her transformation was complete. She was no longer the desperate woman who had gambled her last dollars on a wind turbine. She had become proof that individual courage could challenge institutional power, that truth could survive corporate attempts at suppression. The wind turbine still spun on her Nebraska property, now a historical landmark and symbol of how the most powerful weapons sometimes hide in the most innocent places. 1 year later, Maya stood beside a new wind turbine, this one legitimately purchased, properly installed, and generating clean energy without harboring corporate secrets. Lily helped her flip the switch that would power the Rodriguez Foundation for Environmental Justice, built on the same land where their desperate gamble had begun. They had come full circle, but everything had changed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.